It seems hard to believe when you say it out loud like this, but it's been nearly 3 decades since William Shatner last portrayed Captain James T. Kirk on the silver screen, since they wrapped production on Star Trek Generations, which came out in 1994, which is coming up on 28 years ago. Well, these days, Shatner spends his time being the most freakishly energetic 90-year-old man that ever lived, and yesterday, as you surely have heard by now, he had the chance to become history's most elderly space traveler when he took a short suborbital hop on one of Jeff Bezos' penis rockets. What was the name I gave to the last rocket, the one Bezos flew in? I think I called it Bell End 1. What does that make this one? Let's call it the Mushroom Tip 3000, shall we? So I was watching some of the coverage of this flight, and specifically the aftermath of it, and specifically Shatner's comments in the aftermath. And it occurs to me that everyone's getting the interesting part wrong. The most fascinating aspect for me wasn't Shatner becoming the world's oldest space traveler. And it's not his cultural association with spaceflight, but rather it's the fact that he is the first classically trained Shakespearean actor who has been to space. And a lot of people forget that about Shatner, since he, of course, developed a reputation for hemming it up and being a scenery-chewing TV actor, but he came up as a Shakespearean stage actor. He went to all the fanciest drama schools in Canada and in England. Christopher Plummer was one of his contemporaries when he was young. And if he doesn't get the Star Trek gig and become so associated with the role of Captain Kirk to become to the point of being typecast and having his career effectively ruined by it, he probably would have spent the bulk of his career on the Shakespearean stage, which is where the sizable majority of his experience had been before he happened to land the Kirk role when they were recasting the series after NBC rejected the first pilot of Star Trek. So it's not entirely fair, I don't think, that he got saddled with that reputation, the aforementioned reputation of being a guy who munches on the scenery and overreacts to a totally absurd degree, because you have to remember, this was a classy Shakespearean stage actor, didn't have a whole lot of experience on TV, and he was playing down to this material. If you had cast Sir Laurence Olivier in the role of Captain Kirk, it would have come off seeming absurd in exactly the same way, because that is an awkward, idiomatic shift when the bulk of your experience is playing Shakespeare characters, on the classical stage, and you're trying to pivot to playing on a sci-fi TV show that's aimed at adolescents and young adults. But when Shatner got back from his space flight yesterday, and I was listening to his commentary, it occurred to me that we've been sending people into space for 60 years now, but it wasn't until yesterday, until we sent a classically trained Shakespearean actor, that someone came back from a space flight who actually possessed the skills to describe the experience in a manner that does justice to it and to the wonder of it all. I mean, the biggest problem with sending military test pilots to the moon was that military test pilots, they're really good at flying aircraft and monitoring systems. They have all the skills you're looking for when the mission is to fly there, get to the place, and fly back and not die. But when you're looking for a powerful description of the existential experience of being in a place where no one's ever been, of what it's like to break the surly bonds of Earth and be the first men to look up close at another heavenly body with their own eyes, then all you get is Jim Lovell saying, Houston, the moon is gray. No color. Lots of craters. Over? But with Shatner, one got the feeling that he was determined to come back from this experience wanting to use his unique skill set to describe what he had seen and felt in a way that lives up to the enormity of what it's like to be one of the still very few Earthlings to have been to space. And I think my favorite thing is his honesty, because he kept talking about death, which stands to reason when you're a man whose 90th birthday is already in the rearview mirror. Shatner makes no bones about the fact that when you're a man his age, when you're older than most people ever get to be, when you're old enough that most of the people you know are dead already, then one's thoughts often turn to one's mortality. And those thoughts are always close at hand. And I guess some people might have found it depressing, but I thought it was great. Just the honesty of it. How he wondered out loud about, There it is, this razor-thin boundary. On the one side is bright blue sky, on the other side is the infinite black nothingness of our outer space, and if you're 90 years old seeing a sight like that for the first and only time, who wouldn't choose to see that image through the lens of one's own encroaching mortality? And I think that for the majority of us who are already adults and who will never get the opportunity to be space tourists, I felt like Bill Shatner came back from this little toe dip in outer space and made a series of statements that probably do better justice to the experience of spaceflight than we've ever gotten from any professional astronaut. And I respect the fact that he seemed to be focused on trying to take the whole thing in and being able to describe the experience afterward in a way that the rest of us can appreciate and identify with. Gosh, Shatner, he had his face up against the glass the entire time, just trying to take it all in before it was over. While his crewmates, of course, were giggling and playing with toys. And I wish we had gotten just one, oh my. And yeah, Jeff Bezos, generally speaking, one of the worst people in the world, but putting Shatner in space was a cool thing to do. Bezos is a lot more tolerable when he's launching penis rockets than he is when he's trying to crush small businesses and be the de facto emperor of the world. Now, Jim Eagle, take us out of space, Doc. 1/4 impulse power, if you please. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I am running out of snappy rejoinders to say when people come up to me with, dude, I was watching one of your videos and the view count kept going down instead of up. What's the deal with that? And I don't know the answer, but I have two theories. One, this is YouTube's friendly way of saying, we admire and respect your work, we find none of your content objectionable, and we very much want you to succeed here on our platform. Or two, watching this channel is so rewarding, so edifying, so mind-expanding, that it actually makes time run backward, and you become younger. But having said that, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. Happy Friday. I hope your week was an agreeable one. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. Now, as you know, we spend a lot of time on this program fantasizing about which sectors of the federal government, which cabinet-level agencies, which huge, massive swaths of the administrative state could be gotten rid of, abolished altogether, flushed down the proverbial crapper with extreme prejudice without any negative consequences accruing to anyone. Except, of course, perhaps the overpaid, incompetent grifter bureaucrats who would then have to go get real jobs in the real world. And when we do indulge those fantasies, when we start making lists of the most worthless agencies and departments, the ones where if you got rid of them, not only would there be no negative consequences that resulted from it, but it would actually create an immediate, demonstrable, discernible benefit. The Department of Transportation is always at or near the top of that list, along with the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services. Those always seem to wind up being the three that are on the medal stand each time we play the Olympic Games of bureaucratic redundancy. As we discussed during the episode where we ran through the Great Society, the Department of Transportation was a Great Society initiative. There was never any particular reason why we needed to have a federal Department of Transportation, but this was the mid-'60s. We just re-elected our big government socialist president and growing that big, beautiful federal bureaucracy so it would be big enough to micromanage every single detail of your daily life. That was the order of the day. So in 1966, Congress gave us not one, but two brand new cabinet-level departments, Transportation and the aforementioned HHS. There was never any particularly compelling reason why the Department of Transportation needed to exist. The rationale for it had mostly to do with interstate commerce and the freeway system, but we had been building the interstate highways for over 15 years by that point, and it was going just fine, even when there was no federal Department of Transportation, when those functions were being handled by the Department of the Interior. And the freeways still got built, and the world kept on spinning, but then These are Democrats we're talking about. And when Democrats are in charge, the last question you will ever hear them ask is, wait, do we actually need this gigantic new federal bureaucracy? And that's just about enough of that kind of talk. Now, you don't create new bureaucracies because there is a need for them to exist. You create new bureaucracies because you damn well can. Because once you've created a new bureaucracy, once you've planted that seed and watched it take root, it exists forever. No one's going to uncreate it. And it grows and it grows and it grows like a beautiful evergreen, fertilized with the tax dollars of all those silly rubes and simpletons out there in flyover country. It becomes a place overflowing with highly paid patronage jobs that you can distribute around to the dull, unexceptional children of your political benefactors. And what's more, it creates an opening for another cabinet secretary. Because dull, unexceptional people don't just need jobs in middle management, you also need patronage jobs for your former rivals in the contest for the last presidential nomination, because it's a matter of basic political arithmetic that if you give your former opponents ridiculously highly paid cabinet-level positions where they never have to do any actual work, they become so very grateful that ideally they agree not to try and primary you when it's time to run for re-election. Which brings us neatly along to the current U.S. Secretary of Transportation, a former college party town mayor and spectacularly failed presidential candidate by the name of Pete Buttigieg, who's been in his current position as Transportation Secretary for 8 months and 2 weeks, but really it's only been 6 months and 2 weeks because Secretary Buttigieg has been off work for the past 2 months on something called paternity leave. He hasn't made a single appearance during work that entire time, as near as anyone can tell. And if it wasn't for his portrait hanging on the wall at the office, the people who work at the Department of Transportation would have to be forgiven if they had completely forgotten the identity of their own boss. Now, Secretary Buttigieg, I would call him Secretary Pete, but it just doesn't sound as cuddly and adorable as Mayor Pete, so I won't. Now, as you may be aware, he is a friend of Dorothy, a man's man, if you might say. In fact, when he showed up for his own wedding, the bride was another dude, a dude named Chasen. Which begs a question that just needs to be asked. When you name your son Chasen, isn't there like 157% likelihood he's going to wind up gay? Because somehow, improbably, you never see guys named Chasen working as lumberjacks or longshoremen or truck drivers or rodeo cowboys or offensive linemen or explosive ordnance disposal technicians. When you christen your newborn baby boy with a moniker like Chasen, I guess you just start counting the days until his gay wedding. And look, I don't claim to have any expertise in the area of gay marriage naming conventions, so I ask this question in good faith out of a genuine and abiding curiosity. When you get gay married to another dude, which guy is supposed to take the other guy's name? Because apparently Chasen took Pete's name and is now known as Chasen Glesman Buttigieg. I think Mr. Pete would sound more elegant, but nobody asked me. But now Secretary Pete, he didn't change anything about his own name. So what goes into that determination? How come Pete didn't change his name to Pete Buttigieg Gles? How come Chasen has to be the name taker? Did they arm wrestle for it? A push-up contest? Did they put on a DVD of Steel Magnolias and whichever husband bursts out into tears first has to take the name of the other? Because that seems like a pretty fair and equitable solution to the problem, if I'm being honest. But in any event, Mr. and Mrs. Buttigieg, or Mr. and Mr. Glesman Buttigieg, or Mr. and Mr. Buttigieg Glesman, as the case may be, they became parents on 17 August of this year when they welcomed newborn twins, a son and a daughter, into the world. And if you're asking right now, wait, how can two dudes be the parents of newborn children? Then I just want you to know I'm deeply ashamed of you for being such a filthy, monstrous homophobe, and you are henceforth banned from the program, because we don't tolerate that sort of bigotry here at Castle Curmudgeon, and you really should be ashamed of yourself, and I expect you to issue a press release stating how deeply sorry you are for the pain that you've caused, and that you promise to do better in the future. Now, you may have some vague recollection of the day when Pete and Chasen welcomed their bouncing baby boy and girl into the world, but you don't have any recollection, just as I don't, just as nobody does, of where the children actually came from, because the Buttigiegs, or the Buttigieg Glesmans, or the Glesman Buttigiegs, or Mr. and Mrs. Mayor Pete, take your pick, they've been extremely tight-lipped about that. No pun intended. Were these twins adopted? Don't know. Is one of the two fathers the actual biological father? Don't know. Are each of the fathers the biological father of one twin each? Don't know. Were they carried by a surrogate? Don't know. And if there was a surrogate involved, did one or both of Mr. and Mr. Glesman Buttigieg have to briefly pinch hit for the other team, or did they opt to go the strictly clinical route? I'm not poking fun here. Well, yes, I am, but still, I don't think it's unreasonable to wonder about the answers to these questions, because when two gay married dudes suddenly announce on Twitter that they're the parents of newborn twins, and they post a really kind of creepy, bizarre picture of themselves sitting in a hospital bed, both wearing gowns, each holding an infant that came from some undisclosed orifice on some undisclosed person. I'm sorry, I have an overactively inquisitive mind, and I want to know where the hell these two children came from, and why these two dudes are acting like they're hospital patients. Because yeah, I understand the prevailing woke leftist orthodoxy is that manhood and womanhood are just abstract concepts, and they're fully negotiable from day to day, and you can switch from being the one to the other just by affirmation. But I still live in a world, whether they want to live in it or not, where children don't enter into existence except through the legs of a human female, which is apparently a controversial thing to say now. Dave Chappelle says that in his latest Netflix special, and now he's got outraged purple-haired land whales coming after him, demanding he be canceled and deplatformed and sent to Guantanamo for woke diversity waterboarding. But back to the actual point. I'm willing to go out on a limb here and say that neither Pete nor Chasen carried these twins to term in his man uterus and squeezed them out through his mangina and is currently suckling them on his hairy man nipple. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but I am alleging that there was a woman involved in this thing at some point in some capacity. And what is the point of erasing her from the story? Isn't that rather rude? You two guys can dress up in hospital gowns all you want and pretend you got each other pregnant and you each squeezed a baby out of your little man urethra, but the services of an actual woman with female plumbing were required here in some capacity. And it just seems like when you're doing your birth announcement, how about Mr. and Mr. Buttigieg gave birth to bouncing baby twins today, that you would want to at least give a shout out to the woman whose body you used as a vessel for your little bundles of joy. But you dress yourselves up in hospital gowns and little cute shower caps and blast it out to the world like, yep, we did this all by ourselves, bitches. 2 men, 2 babies, 1 scoreboard. I don't see no woman here. You see any woman here? Neither do we. Now give us some damn privacy so we can do our chest feeding. It's not easy producing milk with you nosy bastards staring at us like that. So will you show some respect, please? So Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, has been off work on paid leave for basically 35% of his tenure in office so far. And the White House says he is a hero and a role model. The fake news media are fawning all over him for being such a dedicated husband and father, for not showing up for work in over 2 months while various transportation-oriented crises continue to afflict the country, which seems like something that might be within the purview of the Transportation Secretary. But like I said, let's be real, it's a fake job in a fake department that exists just for the sake of existing. Now, pro tip, if you can not show up at work for 8 weeks in a row and nobody even notices, your job is probably fake. Oh, and before we go, small bit of channel business I need to attend to. Hockey season is starting next week, and they're actually letting people in the building this year, which is exciting. My daughter and I are season ticket holders for the San Diego Gulls. Home opener is next Friday, which obviously conflicts with the normal broadcast schedule. So starting this week and going until April, when it's a week that has a Wednesday and or a Friday home game, I'm going to switch to a Tuesday, Thursday schedule those weeks instead of the normal Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I will see you 4 nights from now for the first ever Tuesday edition of the program, and if you are not excited about that, then you ain't black. Until then, here is wishing everyone a delightful, edifying weekend. I will see you Tuesday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.